Two Women Talking is back. This is a new format for Two Women Talking, where it is me, Leanna Kersner, talking to another woman, and it's going to be a series of revolving guests. And this episode of Two Women Talking, we've got Bianca here. Bianca is no stranger to my community. You may recognize Bianca from Myself and Comics, a YouTube channel that, well, it started with like manga and comics, right, Bianca? But you're branching out
hmm
into movies, TV shows, games, anything indie. And Bianca is also a voice actress. Bianca, welcome to Two Women Talking.
Hello, thank you for having me.
All right. Now, Bianca picked this topic. We're talking colorism. Now, if you don't know what colorism is, it's also known as skin color stratification. It's sort of all people who are people of color are not treated equally. Usually it's the favoring of lighter skin over darker skin, which is branched out into an entire beauty industry of skin lightening products, colored contact lenses, all this stuff. Now, Bianca, why did you want to talk about this topic?
So, as somebody who is not white myself, and somebody who lives in the regional area of Florida, something like racism was not something that I was taught as a child, so I didn't really understand anything on that. Like, I'm like, hey, you're being mean, or you're just being extra mean. Um, But as I got older and exited out of my anti-SJW phase, I started to wanting to um, fully understand what racism is. And then when I started to learn more about racism, colorism ended up being like the next step that I had to learn, which was a little bit harder for me, because I'm like, okay, so there's a whole thing, okay. Um, and then now that I'm understanding more on racism and colorism, which I will get wrong, don't get me wrong, because I'm still learning, but I'm also still young. I'm only 28. Uh, been wanting to talk more about that if there was a situation for this example that I'm going to put out should arise. And the reason I wanted to about this today is because of the Jon Stewart casting for um, the Green Lantern stuff that's going to be coming out.
Right, for the show Lanterns
Yes,
and the casting of Aaron Pierre,
yes.
who I just saw on Netflix in Rebel Ridge. He was very good. I could see him as Jon Stewart. You know, it was everything. It was ex-military. He was kind of cerebral. You know, he was a trainer in the military in Rebel Ridge, so he wasn't like a thug. And so obviously you see the parallels with Green Lantern, but I'm not aware of this controversy. So what happened?
hmm So, there was a darker skinned, there was a casting call. I believe that's what it's called.
Yes. Yeah.
So there was two guys. One of them was Aaron, and the other one was another actor who was of darker skinned. Just for like the audience is aware. Like I'm just now learning Aaron's name. I'm just now
Right.
learning Aaron's name because of this, and I didn't get a chance to learn the other actor's name, mostly because Aaron was such a big topic on social media because people were talking about the whole colorism thing. It was to the
Right.
point where people weren't even naming the darker skinned actor who was also wanting to get the role. And so that ended up getting buried. And I'm like, oh, well, frick. One thing that came out was that despite which I didn't see people talking about, despite the Mr. Terrific casting
Mhm.
being very good, I love the casting for that.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, yeah, we got a darker skinned black actor, yay. And then people were like, okay, this is James Gunn, this is the next step. Choose the
Right.
darker skinned one, because the darker skinned one is apparently also a seasoned actor and he's darker skinned. What
Right.
became of light of this was that apparently, um, I believe his name is Denny O'Neil. He
Yep,
was, yeah. So apparently back in the day, he fought to have Jon Stewart be
correct.
darker skinned as possible.
Yeah,
And there was this whole thing of like, yeah, we understand he might be good in the role, especially since Rebel Ridge just came out, which I just
right.
finished seeing today.
Yeah,
So I was like, oh yeah, this is literally like tone for tone how Jon Stewart would actually be. And I even said myself, and so did other people, of the acting is not the problem. I'm pretty sure he would be a great Jon Stewart.
right.
The problem was possible colorism.
Was it Stephen James who was the other person that was being considered?
Um, Possibly.
He played Jesse Owens in the 2016 race film. He was in Homecoming. Um he's been in a bunch of stuff. I mean, he's darker skinned. He's not dark, right? So that's interesting. He's the only other person I've seen mentioned for the casting of Jon Stewart in Lanterns. So it's interesting. Then of course there's the other problem of everything is color treated now, so it's very hard to know what someone actually looks like without lighting. I mean, obviously the big difference with Aaron Pierre is his eyes, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was
And yeah, he's got kind of bluish, grayish, greenish. They're very striking,
I think they're
right?
hazel. They got to be hazel.
Yeah.
They look like they change color because I have hazel eyes and my brother has hazel eyes. Mine turns different types of
Yeah.
brown, yellow. My brother is gray, green, blue, that kind
Yeah,
of thing.
mine's the same. And I mean, in certain ways, the character is drawn, his eyes do glow green. That's something with the character. And so I wondered if they thought that, oh, this is extra kind of on point with that. It is tough, right? Because this is where we get into the messy reality of I got this first from Edward James Olmos when I interviewed him when he was on Battlestar Galactica. But race isn't real, but it's very real. It was a colonial construct that basically determined who was more of a person based on how light your skin was. And going back to that, Aaron Pierre does have, his background is multiple Caribbean um uh islands, Jamaica, Curacao. Is that how it's pronounced? Yeah. And
I was
then
gonna say
he,
you can't ask me.
yeah, well, I know it's blue curacao is the drink, but I don't want to confuse it. But then he has family from Sierra Leone, which is in West Africa, but it looks like, and he's British by birth. So,
I did hear he was biracial.
he's got hazel eyes. Very definitely, right? And that's, I mean, maybe that's the place to start because not only do we have this history of colonialism, which is where the mixed race and biracial people of the Caribbean come from, uh, but it is undeniable that white features got you places. They open doors. If you looked, hair is a big thing, right?
Yes.
Even when I was a kid, the whole discussion around hair and, hearing good hair versus they never said bad hair, but it was always she's got good hair, which meant it was more white textured. This stuff does matter.
For me, it was your hair is not professional enough from what I've heard.
Oh,
And from like when I used to work at a pet store, it was predominantly like Cuban and Haitian. Uh,
now it was professional code for straighter.
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
I would have Haitian friends who would tell me that they would get rejected from a job because of their hair.
Right.
And like a lot of them are like some of them have said that it could even be like a very nice afro. Like, a normal
Right.
afro. Like people think afros look great and all that stuff, since they use it for aesthetic reasons. But like even then the afro would be considered not professional.
That's wild because the neighborhood I grew up in, that was not a thing. So when I first found out about this, I was like, what? Whoa. Because I mean, braids are normalized here.
Yeah,
Natural hair is
but
normalized.
even then, there has been some schools.
Who don't
I'm
allow dreads. Yeah.
not no braids,
Braids
braids.
even.
There
Yeah,
was a
it's
there was a
yeah.
whole not homecoming. It was a prom, and a little girl. I think she was eighth grade or high school or freshman high school.
Yeah.
It was one of those, and they said that we don't like your braids, so we're gonna unless you take them out, we're going to cancel prom. And then there
Wow.
was another situation relating to that where the girl had to wear braids and she had to wear braids like every single day. And like that was just like frustrating on the parents.
Yeah, and one of the things that make this dicey is braiding, things like that are considered protective hairstyles, meaning they actually protect the hair from breakage. It's
Hmm.
not just a fashion statement. In some cases it is, but in a lot of ways it protects the hair. I mean, washing it takes a lot of work, but it's designed to kind of be in there and stop the hair from getting too exposed to the elements. And so this is a big topic of conversation. And then, of course, there's the fact that we do see there's this whole thing with mixed race and biracial. Some people, it's like you're black sometimes, you're not black sometimes, you're not
Or
black
like
enough.
black girls. Hmm.
Right, right. And it's sort of like it shifts. And that can be really confusing, especially for young people in terms of depictions in the media. I think it's great that we have people like um uh well, Lupita Nyong'o looks
I love
there. I
Lupita
love
Nyong'o.
See the Wild Robot. It is so good.
I
She
have to
does
still
the
see it.
voice. It is so good. But she's good in everything,
It's
right?
true.
Yeah.
It's my father. It was my father's first time seeing a black Mexican. He didn't know they existed.
Really?
Yes, and I was surprised because as somebody who works retail, you see all types of people. So I've seen black Cubans, I've
Right.
seen black Puerto
Right.
Ricans, and he's
Right.
Puerto Rican. And I'm like, have you ever seen a black Puerto Rican before? And then he was like, well, maybe not that black. And I'm like,
Right.
maybe lighter skin, just lighter brown. And he's like, yeah, I've seen lighter brown, but not anybody as black as Lupita Nyong'o. Because like
Right.
when her scene came up and she started speaking Spanish, he's like, whoa, her Spanish is really good. And I'm like, Dad, she's Mexican. Her name's
Yeah.
Lupita. And
Yeah.
he's like, what? He was like shocked. It was a
Yeah.
cultural shock, and I loved
And,
it.
and then there's people like Shawnette Renee Wilson. I also love. She
Yes.
played Mina Okafor on The Resident, among other things. I mean, you say she's been in Black Panther. That doesn't narrow it down anymore, right? Like Black
Which
Panther just kind of
one?
ripped the lid off of she was also, if you've seen Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, she was the CIA agent in it. And if you haven't, that movie's fun. Go see it. But it's great that we're in an era where we can have a Lupita Nyong'o or a Shawnette Renee Wilson and then say a Halle Berry or a Mariah Carey or even Naomi Osaka who
Hmm.
are but and then there's people like Rashida Jones who get left out of the conversation because she looks more white, but her dad was Quincy Jones.
I heard
Uh
that happened with oh shoot. She is the voice actress for Yzma from The Emperor's New Groove. She was Catwoman in the Adam
oh,
West Catwoman. Um
I just watched
Ed
Eartha Kitt. That
Eartha
yeah.
Kitt. I
Yeah.
was thinking Edam, like, no, that's not her name.
Yeah, that's Edit James. Eartha Kitt. We just screened Ernest Scared Stupid on the Discord. If you have not seen Ernest Scared Stupid, you can rent it for like $5.99 on Amazon. Cult classic Halloween movie. Eartha Kitt steals the freaking show.
I
Uh,
love Eartha Kitt. And I
yeah,
didn't know
she's
that she was considered white to a lot of people until I was like scrolling down on Twitter. They're like, hey, here's Eartha Kitt. It's her birthday. Just so you
yeah.
know, people thought she really thought she was white. And I'm like, I don't I'm like, huh? And I'm like,
Yeah,
she's
what?
And not only that, and Maya Randolph, I believe
Mm-hmm.
her name is as well, which I just finished watching her show,
Oh,
Loot.
Maya Rudolph, who plays Kamala
Maya
Harris on
Rudolph.
SNL. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, people thought she was white too, and I'm like, I don't know, I don't understand. And then because of the Aaron Pierre casting,
Hmm.
I don't think it's just a young people thing where they just get confused. Apparently, a lot of older people as well are just as confused because many of um, older people, older men, and older black men would say, "Hey, you just want to put a black man down for this cancer." Like, no, 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 it's just colorism. They could have
Right.
gotten a darker skinned actor. Like, I understand that he would probably be great for the role. And, seeing Rebel Ridge, I was like, yeah, that's point on point.
Yeah.
But then they're like, no, 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 you're just this is not colorism, doesn't exist. It's racism. You're saying he's not black enough. And they're like,
Right.
no, not.
This is where it gets very messy. I mean, that we should say, I feel awful for Aaron Pierre in all of this, right? Because he
Yeah.
can't help the way he looks, and he could have just been the best. He did the best audition, right? He could
Yeah,
have just been,
and James Gunn actually commented on that. Somebody was like, "Hey, so how did you get why did you pick Aaron Pierre?" And it was just that question. They didn't dive into it much.
yeah,
But James Gunn responded with, "I saw both of them and I thought that Aaron Pierre oh, what's it called? Not atmosphere, but
yeah.
uh,
I
his
know the
aura
word.
or
Yes, yeah.
the way he performed, it was liked. And I'm like, okay, I can see that.
Yeah, it sucks, right? Because everybody get no matter where you are on the not white spectrum, you lose somehow in this conversation, right?
Yes, there's no winners,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing about it. Apparently, Aaron Pierre was almost cast as Adam Warlock as well. So he's
Adam
somebody,
Warlock.
yeah, from
It's
Guardians 3.
ah, I still have
Yeah.
not seen it, but now that you said it, I'm like, okay, I remember who that is.
Yeah. And this, I mean, James Gunn has not been afraid to put black actors in his stuff, right?
No, which is something that I loved greatly. Like for Peacemaker, Amanda Waller's daughter, like she
Right.
was like such a highlight for me.
Yeah. But then they got Zoe Saldana, who is mixed race.
Hmm.
And then you haven't seen Chikwudi Iwuji as High Evolutionary, but he is phenomenal, right? So good. So, James Gunn, he's got instincts. He's not afraid of inclusion. Um, there's it's one of those things where it is immediately uncomfortable whenever you get into this because I'm glad you've seen Rebel Ridge because it's like, yeah, Jon Stewart, I think people underestimate how difficult that character is to truly embody.
It is.
Yeah, he's an interesting combination of things. In that they're like, oh, he's a Black Green Lantern, but he's more than that, right? Like his
Yeah, he was my
backstory,
childhood.
right? I mean, for a lot of people who grew up under the Justice League cartoons, the Bruce Timm cartoons, he was their Green Lantern, right?
I'm
And
gonna add Paul Dini on here. I don't want to give away the credit to
yeah.
Paul
Yeah,
Dini.
Paul Dini as well. Yeah. But John Stewart was only the third black DC superhero. They say of African ancestry, but um, he came in the 80s. Um, which was, you don't think about these things mattering that far back. But he's he started as an architect. They made him a Marine. Some people say it's a retcon, some people don't. They made him a Marine from Michigan. Um, and he was quite belligerent at first, right? They did sort of a reverse bigotry story. Did you read that one?
No.
Okay. Um it because it was all who was going to succeed Hal Jordan, if I'm remembering, and it was either Guy Gardner or Jon Stewart. And um, they
I would have
they
picked Jon Stewart.
they got
I
into
love Guy
the
Gardner though.
they've got into the chip on his shoulder territory, which
Oh.
aged poorly. And they had him pushed into situations where he had to like defend a racist politician. Um, and that showed because everybody's like, oh, you just didn't defend him because he's racist. And then it gives them a chance to show that Jon Stewart is actually extremely intelligent because he figured out that the politician had staged the attack for political advantage. Um, so we're not talking about modern political discourse. I swear, this was a story from like back in the 80s. I think it was the 80s,
History
maybe
just
the 90s.
repeats.
Yeah, but Jon Stewart is a very particular weight to him, right? It's very, very easy for the character to be flat or boring or too stoic. It's also very easy for the character to be cartoony. He's the opposite of sort of like a blaxploitation route Sam Jackson kind of character, right? That's not fair to Sam Jackson. He's much more capable, but most of his roles are that, right? Very bombastic. Um, and so you need a particular guy to get that. He's got to sort of embody the character without words. And so I get what James Gunn's saying. I trust James Gunn. I very much understand why a lot of people just sitting back and consuming media are sick of this shit, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Where do you land on it? Do you think there was some either intentional, unintentional colorism at play? Do you think James Gunn is, just talking a good game because they wouldn't let him pick the other guy, or do you think it's actually the best guy got the part?
I honestly think it's unintentional colorism and the best guy got the part. A mix of those both.
Okay,
It's
so you think there was colorism, but even with that aside, Aaron
I
Pierre's the right
think it was
guy?
more like it's unintentional because it wasn't thought about too much. Like I didn't know about the Daniel O'Neill wanting Jon Stewart to be being as dark as possible until all of this came out because the arguments online were people were like, no, 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 Aaron Pierre is a great person for the role because they would randomly pick a comic where Jon Stewart was portrayed lighter than usual to defend the actions. And then that's when people are like, okay, so that's how you're gonna play it. Let me give you all of these where he's darker skinned. But I think that's also a problem with the comic books nowadays. Like tons of miscommunication or no communication at all, where a lot of darker skinned characters are becoming lighter skinned depending on the artist, which
Right.
is something I looked at one of my older videos and I was talking about America Chavez from
Mm-hmm.
Doctor Strange to uh something madness.
Multiverse of Madness, yes.
Multiverse of Madness. And I was wanting to remember what I said because colorism is also a big part of um part of the casting and the character and the comic book character. And I mentioned the cultural aspect of hiring a Mexican for a character who was raised by a Puerto Rican family aspect. So she develops the Puerto Rican
Right.
culture. Um, but I didn't mention colorism. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that sucks because America Chavez Made in the USA comic literally came a year before the movie came out, which the artist is Carlos Gomez, which I follow him on Instagram. And I remember his promotional stuff when it came out. And he's like, okay, so here's America Chavez for a new comic and stuff. And people were like, wait, 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 she's too light. And he was like, what? And they're like, she's too light. Isn't she supposed to look like an Afro Latina. And I say look and not is because she is apparently from this alien planet where everybody looks
Right.
Afro Latina, you know. And at first I felt weird about it, but then I'm like, Superman is supposed to be like an alien, but also like what's it called?
I
Remnant to Jewish immigrants, isn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I remember when I'm gonna butcher her name, Chachiti Gomez. She's American actress, but her background's Mexican. Uh, and people immediately after the movie came out, we saw it. It's like she doesn't sound Puerto Rican, and it was the whole other angle of that. I mean, they're going through the same issue with oh God, spoiler, won't talk about Agatha All Along yet because it's not finished yet. But one of the characters in that they show him having a bar mitzvah, but then it automatically stops counting. So this superhero stuff, it's tough, right? Because the creators of these characters are not necessarily from the backgrounds of the creators, right? Like
Mm.
Denny O'Neil is a white guy. Um, And so I've heard people, now I'm just repeating this, don't kill me, everybody. But I've heard people say, well, we have the right to adapt characters from the original intent. Black Panther is another really shining example of that, right?
Hmm.
That the the original origin of the character, we've gravitated away from that. So it's like, how much of a say does the creator get in how the character is depicted going forward, right? Because then we get into the awkward thing of, well, if we can race swap characters to, I know you've been caught in the middle of these, Bianca, but if
Yeah.
we can race swap characters to black, why can't we race swap black characters white? And it's like, oh boy, how do you even begin there, right?
I actually saw a really good video on it.
Right?
It's a clip of a bigger video, but this 1 minute part was shared like on social media, and I'm like, oh hey, I know this YouTuber. I don't subscribe to him, but I sometimes watch his content. And then he described it, and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how it
And
is.
there is, in fact, a character that was race swapped white when they adapted the comic to a TV show. The Deep from The Boys.
Oh,
Yeah. And Victoria Newman on The Boys started as Victor Newman, who was a
hmm.
black guy.
Stormfront
Stormfront, yeah.
was a guy and
Yep.
then a girl.
Yeah. But
Still
there
kept in
are,
Lexi stuff.
for all the people who say they never race swap a black character white, not true. We're shutting that down now. That happened. But I mean, obviously, the modern Black Panther mythos is very driven by Ta-Nehisi Coates' work
Hmm.
in the mid 2010s. Um, so it's a question of who gets to make these decisions and how do we know? Because I agree with you. I think there might be some unintentional colorism. Because to me, like Zendaya is totally 50-50. So
Yeah,
which side of
she's
Zendaya
half
on
white, I
you?
believe, right?
Yeah. But she's like, because she's built like she's so tall and slim.
Hmm.
But then she's like 50%. So Zendaya is like the Greenwich Mean Time. But I love Zendaya. I love Zendaya.
I did like her quote when she was asked about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was like, so I'm obviously not darker skinned, but I am half white, so
Yeah.
I'm going to be taking white roles, and then so I don't take away from any darker skinned black females, which darker skinned black females is like what we already spoke about a little bit, is like an
Yeah.
entirely
Yeah.
more terrible issue
Yeah.
that's going
And
on.
see,
America Chavez is literally one of them. After,
that's that's the interesting thing, right? Because if you talk about women, on roles for women, everybody totally goes, "Oh, colorism is totally at play with Halle Berry being cast as an African weather witch." No, no, that was name recognition there. There were so many other actresses who were probably better as Storm in X-Men, right? I
Oh,
don't
I
think
heard her
anybody,
accent. It's been a while since I've seen it. I heard her accent is really bad.
I don't even remember her having an accent. They used I think they used the car thief origin for that movie. But
Oh.
compared to, Storm's voice in the X-Men cartoon from the 90s, there's just no majesty in that,
Yeah.
in that take on Storm. Um, Whereas, so with women, we've seen it, there's a lot of discussion about it, the hairstyles, everything, we've gone through all of that. But with men, there's sort of this extra degree of difficulty because
Hmm.
I've been using this example a lot lately. I mean, there's the infamous reality that the O.J. Simpson mugshot, when it was put on the cover of that magazine, they darkened it to make him look more menacing. And
That's terrible.
it's awful, but because there is that psychology, there's so much coding around it. So many dog whistles, so many things that three people will see something and do four different things. It's even happened to the actress on who's playing Elphaba in
Mm,
Wicked. What's her name now? I'll have to look it up. Blanking on it. But
I don't know any Wicked
she
lore.
she objected, you know the basics, that it's a retelling
Wizard
of
of Oz?
Cynthia Erivo. That's right. Another British
Oh,
actress.
dang it.
But they fan photoshopped the movie poster, which is
Poster.
an homage to the musical poster. And of course, the musical poster is very cartoonish. It's very impressionistic. So they removed her eyes. All of a sudden, her eyes are in shadow. And a lot of people will go, "What's wrong with that?" And other people will go, "Oh, no, 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 no." And it's all about your background. It's all about your experiences, right? It's not about intent. Because if
I
people
actually
don't
didn't know it
know,
was a fan edit. I thought it was
yeah,
like an official, and I'm like, I don't see why they changed it, but
no, it was a fan edit to look more like the original poster. And again, they heavily changed Cynthia Erivo's features to make them look, let's face it, whiter, pointier chin, different lip shape.
I
Um,
remember the comments section of you when you spoke about that,
yeah,
and some people said that they don't see any of the black features taken out and that they would understand better if they did see black features taken out. But there, you can definitely, I myself did see like changes. Like
right.
it's not
And
just the nose,
Ariana
it's
Grande, untouched. They didn't make the
untouched.
rest of her white. And then the person who did the fan edit went and didn't touch Ariana Grande's face, but made the rest of it white. And I think that's a good example of colorism, right? Because
It, I
therefore,
think that's where the joke of her cosplaying as other races uh memes happens a lot.
right. I mean, okay, she's Sicilian, right? Which that's another one that at one point that wasn't considered white. Now most people would consider that white, right? But
Yes.
it's tough because I don't want to tell anybody their business that Italy of sudden that area of sudden Italy um whatever most people would consider that white. She looks like she could be Latina, that kind of stuff, right? So
Yeah.
she stays untouched. Cynthia Erivo needs a total makeover.
Hmm.
That's kind of a shining example of colorism, isn't it?
And I felt bad about that because I remember first seeing it on your private Discord,
Yeah.
and there was a talk about it, and it was like, oh my gosh, this actress is overreacting. And then I took a look at it, but colorism wasn't on my mind when I decided to put my input.
Hmm.
And I believe I said something like, I can see this as I guess an overreaction, but I don't even see the problem with the original untouched poster.
Right,
I wanted to add more into it of how like she, it's whispering because I don't know the lore because she's whispering. She's like, there's no non-emotion, if that makes sense. Like I
right.
see an emotion on her face,
Oh,
but it's
yeah.
like a devastating emotion, and I'm like, ah,
Yeah, I
she looks
see
distraught.
like she looks scared and angry at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, but subtly, right? And then we get into the whole they have done studies that show white people are less good at reading emotions on black faces. Which is rough to get. I actually posted the research in the Discord because I'm like,
Yes,
I'm
I
not
wanted to take a
touching
look at
this.
that.
Yeah, I'm not touching this. I'm just gonna put it out there that if there is a sensitivity, it's because it was oh well, I fixed it, meaning her face.
And I felt bad after I wrote that because after I did, and then that's when somebody wrote, no, 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 it's a complete overreaction of how she dealt with this. She shouldn't have done this. She just putting a target on her back. And I was like, okay, I no longer think this is an overreaction on her part. I now
Right.
think it's an overreaction on both of your part, and I kind of regret what I said, so I'm no longer going to be talking about this subject. And I'm like, okay, so I am seeing I'm seeing a colorism right now in front of my face, and I
It,
felt bad that colorism wasn't something that was
it
already something in
this
my mind.
this is the problem about talking with it, right? That instead of trying to understand all the viewpoints, people immediately rush to judgment, right? It's not trying to understand Cynthia Erivo. It's not trying to understand Aaron Pierre, or uh, like a Lupita Nyong'o or anything like that. Like any of the actors or even Halle Berry when she made those comments back in the day about the only jobs that black actresses can get in Hollywood are comic book characters. Like that comment aged like milk, right? Um,
Mm.
but instead of
And I
trying to
believe typecasting them as well too, like the darker skins male and females would usually get the roles of any type of slavery roles because that's the easiest part to get, but
which
any other
is
part is
which is where colorism comes from. And ironically,
mhm.
Cynthia Erivo came up with The Color Purple, I believe, the
I
musical.
still have to see that.
I've heard it. I haven't seen it yet. I want to. It's a rough. I mean, I saw the movie back in the days. I was like, that is rough. Do I want to go back in there? It's probably amazing. But instead of trying to understand these various perspectives, people just rush to judgment, right? It's did she overreact instead of understanding why the reaction was so strong?
Hmm.
And I think that's, you know, a big part of the problem. What as somebody who did sort of get because it all depends on how you're exposed to the issue, right?
Hmm.
I remember when there was that whole thing where some show where a teenage girl was talking to her mother and Taylor Swift reacted to it. And at first I'm like, yeah, okay, I understand why Taylor Swift's upset. And then somebody said, no, the teenager was clearly being a brat. It was fair game. And it's like, okay, well, that makes sense to me too. So everybody's right here. Why can't we just have that? Why can't we just say everybody has their feelings? There's no right or wrong here. Isn't it better to understand why Aaron Pierre is going to be a great Green Lantern, John Stewart, and you understand why people are upset and think colorism is involved? Why can't we have that?
Exactly.